We'll begin. We now begin our next lecture on Kuzari, on the Sefer Kuzari, and we are in this version, the corrupt conversion, on page 267. I'm just going to read really from the Hebrew here, which is the original Ibn Tibbon translation from the Arabic. I know I bounced back and forth with others, and you follow along. But basically, just to remind you where we're up to, we are in the middle of the third essay, paragraph number 5. So if you're using any other edition, you go to the Ma'amar Shlishi, or the third essay, a parak hey, or paragraph number 5. And the bottom line is that the Chaver, the rabbi, is answering the Khazar king's question about what is a pious person in Judaism. What does a pious person in Judaism look like? What do we aspire to? What's what does the ideal Jew look like?
But
Now,
by the way, can I just interrupt?
go ahead, please. Go
It
ahead.
says this is saintly people. We just last night talked about
Yes.
saintly people. My
Yes,
God.
yes, it's true. So last night we talked about Chassidut piety and Mesil Isharim, and we're similar. So I was thinking about that last night. It's interesting that we're so there's little different angles, a lot of similarities, but a little different angles. But we're gonna see what the Kuzari has to say. And in the beginning of paragraph 5, the first two paragraphs, um, he started talking about the how a pious person starts off by by not allowing himself to be his behavior to be influenced by his selfish physical desires and needs, right? Whether it's the desire for food and drink, the desire for sexual intercourse, the desire for honor, the desire for living a good life, and all these kinds of things. And rather than allowing himself to be ruled by those things, he allows his intellect, his mind, to control and do things that are right. Now, if you recall, yet last time we learned, I mentioned that the image of that nowadays, many people in the Haredi world, is it's a common idea of looking at a person who's a gadol batorah, who's great in Torah, as a person who we assume has other skills other than just his Torah and his spiritual skills, right? I mentioned to you that a lot of this that concept, because some people might think, okay, well, he's a holy man, and of course I would go to him for spiritual advice, halachic questions about what the Torah teaches about different subjects and topics, but not necessarily for political or scientific or historic advice would I necessarily go to such a person, which is one way of looking at it. But others would say, no, a Torah scholar has greatness in everything. And the image that the Kuzari is portraying here, it kind of gives birth to the idea, which has become a very prominent idea within Judaism, that a person who is great in Torah and piety is a person who is not just someone who has great spiritual knowledge and spiritual experience, but also a person who is eligible and appropriate for him to be a leader, a community leader, etc., and other things. It's not the main focus of what the Kuzari is saying, but I wanted to mention it to you because I said last week we were going to say something about it and I didn't. So I wanted to say something about it now. But let's focus again more, whether or not that's how we look at a person who's a great person in Torah is a different question altogether. I'm not addressing that. I'm just saying that the idea that exists within Jewish thought today, that a great Torah leader is also a person who has great scientific knowledge, who has great ability to tell us, to lead us politically, and so on, has it would be incorrect to say it has its origins in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's thinking, but it certainly has its earliest, clearest treatment, and this influenced that school of thought very significantly. But now I'm going to start from V'cha'asher asa, right? Once he has now done everything he needs to do. Once he's satisfied his actual physical needs, and those are the things that he really needs, the needs for rest, the needs for sleep, because obviously there are physical needs that we all have, and those things that are necessary for his life, for his health, right? Mashayasbik mehakita, that which is enough for what he does when he's awake, Vatnua, and his movements, b'masei olam, in doing the things that are necessary for him to live in this world. Oz yikra el adaso. Then he can go once he has now provided for his basic physical needs, which is the start, which is the beginning. Now he can call upon his community. Now here he doesn't seem to mean the community of people. He's referring to all of his physical faculties and spiritual faculties and skills and everything as his community. Now that because remember, he's comparing a person who rules over himself to a person who rules over who is a leader of other people. So he can now call to his armies that are listening, that pay attention to his mind, to his intellect, to help him now achieve great things, to now achieve levels that are even higher. So in other words, you've done the basics, but now he can, because he's focused completely on the right things, and he's not focused on his own selfish needs anymore. He's already done with that. He can go move higher in his spiritual growth. Now he can start achieving that level of godliness, which is even higher than being a person who's ruled by his intellect. So a person who's ruled by an intellect will do the right thing and so on. But a person that wants to get to the level of piety that Judaism is leading us towards and teaches us to strive for, now he can start moving in that direction, higher towards godly, more spiritual levels. Visader adaso, and he can order his community, meaning all of his faculties, vitakna, and he can fix the things that he needs to fix. And vidome laseder shasider Moshe alav shalom ladaso svivos Har Sinai, and it is similar to the way that Moshe organized the community around Har Sinai. So it is possible that he's referring here to. I'm not sure, to be honest. I thought originally that he's referring to his community, meaning the people, but he's also is referring to people in general, because remember, he's also referring to him as a leader of others. Now he can right? Now he can command his faculty to that through which he the faculty through which he makes his decisions, right? So that it could now accept and complete and follow everything that he commands, everything that he decides is now the right thing to do. And do it at its appropriate time. As the way his mind and his spiritual faculty tells him that he, without any rebellion, and by rebellion he means selfish and physical desires that try to pull us away from this goal. So that, and he can command his body and the people that he's leading not to go after the demons, right? Which he means the demons that occupy our thoughts. He doesn't here mean physical demons. He means the demons, which are all of those things that pull us away from the proper path. He won't believe them. So all of the little guy in our head that says, why do you need to go to work today? Stay home. You'll be fine. Why do you need to go learn? You don't need to go to learn that shir. You have better things to do. You worked hard. Stay home and watch TV, right? Why do you need to go and do this mitzvah? You're tired. All those little things, or let's go over there. It looks like it's fun. Yeah, you're not supposed to, but it looks fun. Let's go. Those are the demons he's talking about right now. And until he gets to the point where when he needs advice, he only goes to his mind, his intellect. And if his mind tells him, yes, this is an appropriate path, he will accept it. But if it turns out that he thinks about it, he says, no, this is not the right thing to do. This is not the right path to go on. Then he will rebel against them. He will not go in that direction. Right? And then his faculty that makes these decisions will then decide to go and do the right thing. So basically what he's talking about is that a chassid, a person who is truly pious, is a person who who deliberately decides to do the right thing and has full control over his body, and full control over his mind, such that he only does the things that are right and appropriate and proper, and stays away from those influences which try to pull him away from that path. And in the similar way, he's able to lead others on that same proper path. Right? And now he goes ahead and he can refine his thinking, right? And clear his thinking. He can purify it and turn it so that before his mind was thinking about all kinds of things in this world. I'd love to have a new car. It would be nice to go on a good vacation. I'd love to this. I'd love to do all kinds of things. But now instead, his mind is occupied. And now his imagination, remember, if you remember when we learned the Rambam, and the Kuzari is coming from a similar place where they both were educated very deeply in the Aristotelian model. And they understood that there was an active intellect. There was something in our minds that's making these decisions. But then there's an imaginary faculty. It's that part of our mind that which forms images from all of the sensory inputs into our brain, and it forms all kinds of ideas and thoughts and minds, and it can go in all kinds of directions. It desires things, wants things, right? And the idea is to control that imagination so that it's only imagining the things that we're supposed to be imagining. And it's very similar to Maimonides in that respect, in their what I called then the Maimonidean cognitive model, right? So he can command his imagination to lahamtzi hehador shebatzuros hanimtzos etzlo be'ezer hazikaron, to imagine in his mind things that with the help of his memory, right? Lidamos elav ha'inyan ha'aloki ha'mavukash, in order to imagine in his mind. I'm trying to think of a better word than imagine, but images that reflect the desired spiritual issue that he is striving after. Now, this is very interesting because for those of us that studied Rambam understand that Rambam described a very similar process, and so far it was very similar. The process of the control over the imagination by using what the Rambam called was the active intellect. But what he's about to say is very different. The Rambam understood it, if you recall. He understood that it was the active intellect was studying science and nature, philosophy, so on, right? In other words, it was through logic, philosophy, study, science, observing the world around us, observing the greatness of the God who created the world around us, but just by observing things, it was knowledge. In other words, the bottom line is it was intellectual knowledge which allows us to control our koach hadimyon. The Kuzari here, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, is about to drive us in an extremely different direction and an extremely different understanding of how we spiritually control our imagination with our active intellect. And the way he's going to do it is we imagine things, images of spirituality, like the Ma'amad Har Sinai, like standing at Sinai, Ma'amad Avram v'Yitzchok Bahar HaMoriah, and imagining Abraham and Isaac on the mountain at the time of the Akedah, for example. Mishkan Moshe, or you imagine the tabernacle, the Mishkan of Moshe, V'Seder Havoda, or you imagine the service in the Beis HaMikdash, right, in the temple, V'chol HaKavod B'Beis HaMikdash, and the rest of the resting glory of kavod, the honor of God that was present in the holy temple, V'Zula Saharbe, and other similar such images. So so what he's doing here is he's telling us to draw a spiritual inspiration by taking spiritual images and using those to control our imagination. This is very different. If you imagine yourself ever being inspired, say by seeing a picture of thousands and thousands of people praying at the kotel or something, or thousands of people singing and dancing together or something like that, and you find yourself with the spiritual, an uplifting emotion, these are the types of images, or in his case, but his examples are imagining these things that occurred in the Torah, these things that are spiritual images that are engraved in our minds and in our hearts from our collective Jewish memory. that these are the ways with which we control. This is an extremely different mechanism than that which we learned when we studied Rambam together. Rambam's mechanism of active intellect controlling the dimyon, the imagination, was through intellectual achievement and study, right, and knowledge. The Kuzari or Yehuda Levi is getting to a much more it's kind of like a deeper spiritual impulse, and he's trying to draw on those things which arouse us spiritually, these images, and using those to help us control our imagination so that we direct them in the right direction. It's a very, very different type of worship of God, and it's a very, very different type of chassid, a very different type of pious person that they're describing here. So they start with the same cognitive model, which is basically based on Aristotle, but they present us an extremely different picture of spirituality, and that's what we're getting. So umitzava hashomer lishmar. So then he tells his memory, right, to remember this. Remember this moment of spiritual uplifting, this moment of spiritual heights. And he yells at all of those other forces that come in and tell you to doubt these things. It's not real. There never was a Sinai. It wasn't 600,000 people. It wasn't so awe-inspiring. It's an old book, or whatever thoughts they are that bounce through your mind that try to pop the balloon of that spiritual high that you were on. He divorces them from his mind. He kicks them out. He yells at them. Right? And he admonishes his tendency toward anger, his tendency towards lust and desire. Right? Because everyone wants to go, because if you have that spiritual uplifting, then you want to go in a spiritual direction. It means you're letting go of those physical desires that you would otherwise be investing your energy in, right? So, right? And so he doesn't, and those things, the anger, right, and lust, desire, are things which lead us off the path of this spiritual experience that he just described. So remember, he's in the middle of this long talk to the king, right? And he's describing what a pious person is like. So he says a pious person, number one, he gets rid of his physical desires and he focuses on doing what's right because his intellect tells him, I know what's right. But then he moves further than that. That's everyone does. But a spiritual Jew moves further than that. He goes ahead and arouses his heart and his soul so that to spiritual heights, so that all of his focus and imagination is on approaching God and going and approaching this inyan eloki, the spiritual height. So now it goes further, right? After this, after he's on this path, now he's aroused himself, right? Yanhig hakoach hachefzi kol ha'evorim hamishamshim also bezrizus v'charizus v'simcha. Now all of the limbs of his body are now all joined in to this incredible, happy and beautiful, full of zeal and joy and diligence to accomplish and achieve this goal. Now his whole body wants to get into it. Everything. Let me go. I want to do things. I want to do things right. Right. And he's going to stand at the time without being lazy at all. And when it's time to bow, he bows. When it's time to sit, he sits. And he looks like a servant unto his master. He looks with his eyes towards God for the proper path. And his hands stop doing whatever they were doing, right? And they're not even clapping together. And his feet stand straight up. And all of his limbs of his body stand with they're in fear and awe. Are ready to do the commandments of their leader. Their leader, in this case, being his soul, his heart, his mind, which is telling him to act in this proper way. And they're not worrying at all about the fact that they might get hurt on the way. They might run out of energy or anything like that. And his tongue, right, is now agrees. In other words, the thing that he says is goes along the same lines as his thoughts, right? Lo Yosef alav, he doesn't add to it. He doesn't say more than that. He doesn't just babble on about all kinds of things, right? So he immediately jumps to prayer here. He doesn't tell us that he's going to do it, but he does it. He immediately jumps to what prayer is. So in other words, this person, so you sat down, you had this a spiritually uplifting experience. You had this image in your mind that influenced you. Now I'm ready to do the right thing. What are you doing? You're praying, right? He has you jumping to prayer. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I want to point that out, right? So he's praying, and now when he's praying, right? Lo yivate b'tfilas al derech haminhag v'hatava. He's not just gonna babble out a bunch of words, like some people pray, right? As we've seen, right? We've all been to shul when we heard somebody talking like that. These are two birds, like that just say words, but they don't know what they're saying. Every word he says with thought and proper intent. He leaves mano perio, right? And that time of prayer is the heart of everything that he does, and the heart, and it's the perio, it's the fruit, it's the most wonderful time that he has. Via shari tosaf kidrachim hamanigim, and every other time in his day, everything else he does, whether he's going to work, whether he's doing a mitzvah, whether he's learning Torah, even, it's all subservient to the time when he davens, when he prays. Right? Yisavik Yirvaso, he can't wait. He desires that moment of prayer. Shabo mistameh beruchniim v'yisrachek mehabehimim, because it's that time when he attaches himself to spirituality and he stays away from animalistic things, physical things. Via pri yomo v'layla hashalosh itos heim shel tefillah. These 3 times a day when we daven are the fruit, are the most wonderful part of the day. Upri hashavua yom haShabbos, and the fruit of the entire week is the day of Shabbos. He's going to talk about Shabbos in more detail in a minute. Because Shabbos is a time set aside for attaching ourselves to spiritual matters. And he serves God with happiness, lo b'kniya, not out of subservience, but out of happiness and joy. Kasher hisbar is that, as we have explained. So one of the things here, and he's going to do it a little more in a minute, but again, I want to point out a very, very big difference between Rambam, who, as we studied through the Moreh Nevuchim, we even had a hard time figuring out exactly what prayer is according to Rambam. It was a challenge. I mean, we talked about it a lot, and certainly prayer is important in Rambam's thought, but it is a very different picture. If you were to draw a picture of Rambam's heightened time, the time when for him was the greatest moment of spiritual uplifting, it would be study, right? It would be Torah study, or according to Rambam, all study, which
mathematics,
or even mathematics, right? Everything, the study in acquiring and achieving knowledge was Rambam's route to God, right? And he talked about the study of Torah, inside of the study of science, the study of nature, or all kinds of things. That this is right. Whereas the Kuzari is giving us, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is giving us a completely different understanding of what the spiritual height of his day is. It's prayer, right? He hasn't said a word. I'm not saying he won't say anything about Torah study. Sure, he will, but his focus here, when he's describing the ultimate pious person, is a person who looks forward to prayer, a person that is on his highest level of spirituality when he's praying, right? V'aseder hazeh, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. This seder, this order of prayer, when he stands and he davens, mehanefesh, right, that comes from his soul, right? Kiseder hamazon me'aguf, right? It gives the soul, just like food nourishes the body. Mispalel lenafsho v'nizon legufo. He prays for his soul and he eats for his body. That's what prayer is like. Prayer gives life to his soul. Umasmedes olav birchas atfila ares tfila acheres, and the blessing, right, that comes from the prayer that he does in the morning sticks with him until the afternoon, and the afternoon sticks with him until the evening. It keeps him going. Each prayer keeps him going till the next one. Just like we eat breakfast, and then we're not hungry until next mealtime comes. It keeps us over until we're for lunch, and then lunch keeps us going until dinner, and so on. Right? right? The longer he goes without davening, the longer he is from davening, if the koderes v'mashe yifko some olam, right? More and more the influences of the outside world start taking, and the soul starts to get hungrier and hungrier, and we start getting drawn farther and farther away from God, right? Again, this is an image that it's contrasts with the Rambam's image, because if spirituality is to be found in prayer, right, then when you're going about your usual business of life, you're not finding that spirituality. Rambam's path allows you to find that spirituality by intellectually engaging with everything that happens during the day, right? I'm not saying that Rabbi Levi would necessarily disagree with that. I'm pointing out different emphases here, right? Of course, Rabbi Levi agrees that everything we do, right, it can be and should be spiritually uplifting, but it's a very different approach, right? It's an approach where if you're not davening, if you're not standing in shul, if you're not in a spiritual environment, you're missing out. You're farther away. You're getting drawn away, right? Whereas the Maimonidean philosophy was very different, right? So b'mashi paga. So kol shekenim yiveu hatzorach l'chevras na'arim v'nashim v'roim. Here we have the misogyny of it was rampant in those days. So if you had to, God forbid, hang around among kids or women or friends, right, or roim, or bad people, not friends. I thought I said reim for a minute, but it's that could even draw you even further away, right? V'yishma mashe achir zakos nafsho, right? And he has to hear things that will blacken with smoke the purity of his soul, right? Now he's not in shul anymore. He's not in that spiritual environment. He's walking around in the world, hearing things from all kinds of random people that aren't the best spiritual influence on him. It'll make things worse. Midvarim keurim, from things that are disgusting, v'nigunim, or songs, shetita nefesh aleim, that draw your soul towards them and draw your soul towards not such good desires, right? And it gets to a point where it's very hard to control that. At the time of davening, mitaher nafshu mikol mashekadam, he's able to purify his soul from everything that preceded it, vitakna la'asin, and fix it for the future, so that he gets himself back on the right path, right? So what is then? So and now he's about to say, and he already started saying, a process which gives us a much better understanding than we had when we learned Rambam about what the point of prayer then is, right? Because the point of prayer then is to get rid of our those desires that are constantly drawing us away from the path of God, and it gives us an opportunity to direct ourselves towards God and get rid of all the bad stuff and start focusing and getting ourselves in the right direction. In this sense, both Rabbi Levi and the Rambam both agree and look at prayer as a form of self-improvement, as opposed to a magical formula where we ask God for things and we get them, right? So both have a much more mature understanding of prayer than what many people unfortunately go to shul thinking. That if I go to shul and I daven the right thing, I'll get what I need. I'll get the raise. I'll whatever. That's not how either of them look at prayer. But Rabbi Levi gives us a really nice understanding of prayer as a form of self-improvement, as an opportunity for us to focus our direction towards God. Ad shelo yavor shavua al zeh haseder, right? As long as a full week doesn't go by, right? Ad sheyitakena nefesh v'haguf, ukvar nikbetzu mosarim makdirim im orach hashavua lo yitachin l'taram l'narkosim elav amadas avodas yom im menuchas haguf. What happens is, right, you can, as the week goes by, you can utilize those moments of prayer to keep yourself going in the right direction, right? However, as time goes on, it gets harder and harder to do that, right? It's harder and harder on a daily basis where we do the regular grind, the regular work that we do, right? We keep falling by the wayside. So as the week goes on, we get farther and farther away. So v'az yirtzeh haguf b'Shabbos, and then at that point, our body desires a moment of rest. We need a time when we get rid of all that stuff, where we don't have all those influences putting ourselves away, and just the little recharge that we get from davening 3 times a day is amplified so much more on an entire day of focusing only on the right things, right? That's a shachasala mishistiyamim. Shabbos can now come and fix those things which which you were missing in the 6 days. V'yanachon la'asen, and be prepared for the next week. V'chein nefesh tizkar mashachasram tiras haguf. Similarly, the soul itself, right, has a chance to figure out, right, what was missing, right, because with it, our body was distracted all week with making a living and doing all the chores and so on and so forth that we needed to do. And it's like the body itself is getting healed from the illness that preceded it during the week. And it becomes a time where the soul it strengthens itself, right, to protect it, to help itself protect against. It's like a vaccine against the diseases that are going to slam it in the upcoming week. Just like we heard from Eov, that Eov every week would think, maybe my children have sinned. He would always be thinking, maybe I did something wrong, and constantly try to rectify what he may have done wrong. Okay. So v'achar kain. So here we have we've said a lot. I just there's still obviously a lot more, but I wanted to know if anyone has any comments. I think I probably should have stopped at a couple other occasions, but any comments, questions, observations? I think is a good time.
I couldn't help but reflect on the fact that there is a modern version of what you've described, and the term basically that's used is mindfulness. The modern term for everything that you've said in the secular world is mindfulness. So mindfulness is basically, concentrating instead of prayer on meditation as a way to recharge. Mindfulness also is a way that you take in, you think and you understand where you are and the influences, the bad influences that are coming in internally, and dispel them, basically understanding what good life is about and what being healthy mentally is about. And also you basically discard external environments that come at you. It also talks about community, because you're in community and you have people you relate to in a warm and inviting way. So it's really interesting that even in it seems like human nature that even in a non-religious approach, that people basically approach it in a very similar way to calm the mind, to continue to approach spiritual things, and to become, I guess, a great scholar in what they do, because they talk about how to develop these techniques and so on and so forth, and even incorporate exercise and other things in this. So I just bring that out to sort of hear your comments. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought
No, I think you're making a good point. And first of all, yesh chachma v'goyim talmid. There's wisdom among, not just among the Torah scholars, right? And the ideas of mindfulness, like the way you describe them, are very similar. And what I was thinking is it brings out the idea that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has not said anything about magical rewards of prayer, right? He didn't talk. He's not describing prayer as some form of beseeching God and getting what we're looking for, right? He's describing prayer as a process which is extremely psychologically sensible. It makes a lot of sense. This is, so when people come to prayer with the idea, and people sometimes criticize prayer, there's all kinds of philosophical questions. I don't believe in it. I'm going to pray and God's going to help me. That extremely infantile idea of prayer hasn't showed up at all, right? And which is really Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's first and most passionate description of what prayer is supposed to be. And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. I can't imagine someone who would say that he's wrong on this count. The idea that you spend time to get rid of all the things that are dragging us in 7,000 directions and just focus on doing the right thing and thinking about what's really important, and having that on a regular basis 3 times a day, and then a special day a week where you're able to really focus, and so on. And then he's about to say, well, before I do that, any other questions, comments?
Just to say, you mentioned bird. This translated crow or parrot, which is
Okay.
very descriptive.
All right.
Of the birds.
Yeah. So I don't know what kinds of birds they are. To really know, you'd have to look back at the original Arabic and know what kind of bird he would have been referring to in Arabic in the 10th, 11th century. But I don't know. Anyway, regardless, sounds good to me. So v'yachar kain, and after this that we have on Shabbos, we need a time that happens like every month. That happens, it's that where we have a time to atone for our sins, right? To repent for our sins, to go over our faults and get rid of them. Rotzalomar toldos hachadashim v'chidush hayamim, which is a time of remembering the months and the renewal of days. So what he's talking about now, and he's going to talk about the next couple lines, is the idea of the Jewish calendar, which is a really to people that are familiar, those of us that live the Jewish calendar understand how incredible it is, because each holiday, each time that we have is a time for us to focus on certain ideas that help guide us along these spiritual paths, this journey that God in the Torah, and Judaism wants to keep us on. And some things we need reminders for 3 times a day. Some things we need reminders for weekly. And some things we need reminders for monthly. And some we need reminders for a couple times a year or once a year. But we constantly need renewal. And these special times are opportunities for us to renew. Right? Your person should be prepared for the 3 holidays, the 3 major holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The honorable fast, Asher Bo Yinokim Mikol Avon Shev Kedem, especially, of course, Yom Kippur, V'yasik Bo Mashe Chasar Lo B'Yamim B'Shurim V'Chadashim, right? And those time when you can achieve things that you didn't achieve during those days and weeks and months of the year. V'Tinaka HaNefesh MeHaBilbulim HaMachshavim V'HaKa'asim V'HaTa'avim, from the mess of things that we have that are our thoughts. And again, he emphasizes 2 things that seem to be his real influence. And if you look at the Kuzari as a Musar sefer, a sefer of ethics, I think these 2 ideas, Kaas, anger, he has this thing about, if you noticed, you would have noticed that whenever he criticizes something, Kaas, anger, is one of those things that really draws you away. And the other one is Tava, is desire or lust. So those 2 things, our desire for things that we don't necessarily need, and our anger about things are things that are constantly drawing us away. Right? V'tashuv minitos aleim tshuva gemura. And thus you are able to get away from those things, those messy thoughts, which are anger and lust, and you're able to get away from them in a complete repentance, bein b'machshava, whether it's repentance in your mind and your heart, or in b'masa in your actions. V'imlo titachena teshuva me'amachshava, right? And if he is not able to do this, or he does not do this, right? Because he has so much in his imagination that's drawing him away. He's thinking his mind is much more involved in all the things that he shouldn't be, right? From these foreign influences, these songs and jokes, and nowadays it would be Instagram reels and memes or whatever that drew your heart and mind in the wrong direction. At least, right? He can get rid of the actions, and he can at least admit these bad ideas, and he will try at least to accept upon himself to try not to remember them, and certainly not to do these actions. So this idea that Any one of us that learned in yeshiva, I'm sure we had a rebbe that told us, "Oh, you're not allowed to listen to the songs because those songs influence you in the wrong direction." Looking at pictures or reading articles and bad books and these kind of ideas, right? It obviously, when you influenced these kinds of things, they entice us to go in directions that are the wrong way, and they create in our heart and in our minds desires for things other than spirituality. And certainly, this is true. So we can at least try our best to get rid of them, and at least get rid of and not do the actions which are inspired by such bad influences. And on that day we can fast. A fast in which we try to be similar to the angels. Because it completes you in subservience to God, ubeshiflos, and in seeing and being low, in other words, being humble before God, uva amida, and by standing, in other words, you're not sitting in a relaxed fashion, you're standing, uva krios, and bowing down, v'tushpachos, v'tzilos, and praises of God, and so on, v'kol kochosav hagufim tzamim me'an yanim ativim, and all of our physical faculties are fasting from the natural things that we usually enjoy. Mitaskim batorium, instead we are engaged in Torah related things. Kilu ein bo teva bahami, as if there is no physical nature within us, and that's what that day is designed to do. And this is how a chassid, a pious person, fasts all the time. All of us are required to do this once a year. But sheyana bo haraos v'hashema v'aloshon, he should always he starves here, he hungers his sights and what he listens to and what he speaks about. V'lo yatridem, and he doesn't bother to use them or expose them to zulas mashiyikar v'osolem, only things that focus him further on getting closer to God. And all of his internal all of his cognitive functions, right? His imagination, his desires, his thoughts are all focused in the right direction, and certainly his actions are only good, proper actions. So that concludes paragraph 5, which would make for a good stopping point tonight. My brain is tired. But
yeah, can I ask a question?
Please, yes. No, I'm going to open the floor for questions right now. So fire away.
Okay. There were 2 paragraphs earlier, sub 14, and I thought it was a little amusing. It says, talking about improper thoughts. Let me quote it: because his memory has stored that which he heard as a youth of songs and poetry. Well, it seems to me, if that's the correct interpretation of the Hebrew songs and poetry, it seems to me for a guy like Levi to consider poetry as somehow corrupting a youthful mind. It seems
right, especially considering that he is like probably of the poets in Jewish history. Probably, I mean, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he's the most famous of all the poets. It might be maybe Rabbi Lazar Akali or maybe a couple others, but for the most part, Rabbi Levi would certainly, any list of the top 3, he'd be one of them. That's for sure.
So why does he pick on poetry as something that's a corrupting influence?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's thinking about poetry that extols things other than the holy things. In the context here, he's referring to that kind of poetry. But
is any of this written in the form of poetry?
This book, prose? No. This book was just written in prose. I don't think there's poetry in here. I don't.
Okay.
Ever coming across it. I mean, remember, I think it was last week we learned where he talks about was it last week or the week before, the Hebrew language, and he talks about how poetry isn't the point, and and other languages might. And he was talking about the meter and the rhythm of the words and so on, whereas he himself was responsible for writing in Hebrew the things that he was saying. Hebrew isn't so. We talked about it last week or the week before. Can't remember.
Well, here's a question which I don't think it's diversion, and some of our other people on the screen can comment. When you read the Kuzari, there's a passion that I don't see when you were going through Maimonides, which would lead me to conclude that as between the two of them, this is the side of Judaism that you embrace with greater passion than Maimonides.
Really? Okay.
I don't know. Anybody else have an observation on that?
I don't know. I like to think of it as the other way around, but maybe you're right. Maybe there are things about myself that I don't realize myself.
I don't know.
Well,
But,
no, I think Saul presents an equal
okay.
approach. I think he's trying to show the passion of what he's saying as opposed to Maimonides, but there is passion in what he says in terms of how he approaches it. So I think Saul is just expressing that passion that he has for Judaism and the way he approaches it. Not necessarily that Saul believes that, because I think we all understand that Saul favors a more scientific and Maimonidean approach.
Oh, really?
And I've been open about it myself. I do as well. But that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. That's just the way you feel more comfortable approaching Jewish thought. So
yeah, and it is definitely. I'm sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Saul sometimes is passionate when he doesn't agree.
That's true too.
Yeah, and again, yeah, but if we do learn from this, if everyone walks out of these classes seeing these two very different approaches to Judaism and understands how these two works that we've studied together so far influenced Judaism in general, and how they offer us different paths, different ways, not one's right or wrong. Sometimes we each might find ourselves in camp A on one day, and we might find ourselves in camp B on the next day, and they're all but this is the richness of Judaism. What I want to do after Kuzari, but we have a long way to go, so this is way premature, but I have a few ideas about what to learn next.
So I think Saul, I also want to mention that, because you lean toward one philosophy and the one approach, doesn't mean you can't glean little nuggets.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Out of that. And I mean, last week I gleaned a lot of nuggets. I think I mentioned to you that was a very productive session last week. I really enjoyed that session because there were things I pulled out that really to me meant a lot. And so you can pull out things that really will help you along the way. And so there's no 100% in what we do anyway. But
no, definitely not.
What I'm saying is, initially my thought was, do I really want to continue doing this? But then after last week, I understood, I do, because you really pull out some things that are helpful.
Yeah, no, and we will, and you'll see. I'm happy because the first two Marim, the first two essays, there are a lot of things in there that I mean, they were tough for me to get through, to be honest. Like, and things that don't resonate that much nowadays. Especially when you talked about scientific things and stuff. It's just the Rambam resonated a lot more. But I knew we were getting to these parts, and these parts do resonate with us, and there's so much to see and learn and know, and I guess the real truth is, if we just all of us achieve a passion for the Torah and a passion for how incredibly rich and beautiful our religion is, and the thinkers and writers that have contributed to making Judaism what it is, and the breadth of thought and the diversity of thought is just astonishingly beautiful. And if we got that out of these classes, then I would have achieved way more than I could imagine, But let's so I guess that we can call it a close for tonight. We'll start next week. We'll do from paragraph number 6, I guess, in the Ma'amar Shlishi. So we'll keep rolling. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Saul.
Good night.
Have a nice night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.